Welcome to everyone who is trickling in. The numbers are slowly climbing here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from in the world. This is the launch webinar for the 2023 Global Biochar Market Report with IBI and USBI. We're excited to have you with us today, and my name is Lauren Boritsky-Smith. I'm the communications lead at the International Biochar Initiative. So as folks trickle in, I'm going to go over just a quick housekeeping item, but I welcome you to put your name and where you're joining from in the chat, just so we can all get acquainted with each other. So for that housekeeping item, after the speakers speak today, we'll have a Q&A session. And I would just please request that you put your questions in the Q&A box or option at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat, because we will not be monitoring the chat for questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A. And lastly, the recording of this webinar will get sent out after we complete the webinar. So again, continue to introduce yourself. Great to see everybody mentioning where they're from in the chat. And I will now hand it over to Lucia Brusigan, who is IBI's board chair, to welcome you and introduce our speakers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the launch of the first Global Biochar Market Report. This is our family photo. This is our first family photo taken in 2023. It shows how we see ourselves. It reports data from more than 1,000 stakeholders, from industry subsectors representing 100 countries across the globe, integrated with qualitative interviews with key experts. There is a bias, sure, but it is reasonable, and the value of this effort is much more relevant since this is the first time we work to offer a picture like this. And I'm glad and grateful for this. And it takes few surprises. The rate of growth and the global economic value of the biochar market are impressive and far beyond my expectations. Also, from a climate perspective, it seems we are doing better than what it is traced by the voluntary carbon markets. The industry generates a greater quantity of biochar than what it is accounted for in the VCM. The majority of producers involved in the survey, representing over 50% of global biochar production, are not participating in the voluntary carbon markets. So not all the biochar operations around are selling BCC. But they are anyway contributing to sequester carbon, even if they are not valuing this ecosystem service. This is something that's worth investigating further. The demand for biochar is expanding, yet the creation of high-quality markets for physical biochar remains a primary challenge, hindering further growth. Biochar producers employ diverse production technology and business models, both within and across global regions. Growing an industry that accommodates to various scales and models is essential. As I conclude my introduction, I'd like to express my gratitude to those who made this photo possible: the Walker Foundation for the catalytic funding, the U.S. Forest Service, and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities for their generous funding. IBI with Wendy Lou Maxwell-Barton and Lauren Boritsky-Smith, and USBI with Miles Gray, Capacity Consulting, and all the industries and stakeholders that collaborated to supply with information and insights. This marks a solid beginning with the promise of annual updates, bringing out new features that will reflect suggestions received. Now, I invite our authors to take the floor to enrich our understanding and spark engaging discussions. Wendy Lou, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Lucia, and welcome to everyone again. I'm as mentioned, I'm Wendy Lou Maxwell-Barton, Executive Director for the International Biochar Initiative. And I'm going to start out our presentation today with a sort of a high-level overview, as well as the why, how, who, and what of this market research report. Next slide, please. So I think it's probably obvious to everyone on this webinar that industry-led market research is crucial for growing an industry and understanding it. So that, of course, was one of our primary goals for conducting this, and to pick up from the annual market research that IBI conducted up until 2015. But of course, a great deal has changed in that time. We also know that we need to develop reliable estimates for key industry market data that, again, is being reported by the industry. And we also wanted to create a feedback loop between industry associations like International Biochar Initiative, US Biochar Initiative, as well as our many, many national and regional partners, so that we can do a better job of serving the industry. Of course, we need to create benchmarks, which is what this report has done, as well as the mechanism to track long-term industry trends. Next slide, please. Looking back at the history, as I mentioned, up until 2015, IBI was conducting an annual market research report. And then, of course, we have been really, it's been extraordinarily useful to have the European Biochar Industry Consortium, or EBI's, annual market research, which has been focused on the EU primarily. And then in 2022, USBI conducted a survey that was focused primarily on North America, and I believe is still on their website. Next slide, please. How did this research come about? As we mentioned, this was a jointly funded project between IBI and USBI. We engaged with a third-party climate change-focused market research firm, Capacity Consulting, who with us developed the Internet Survey, which is the bulk of this research. That survey was open for about a month in November of 2023. And then we worked with, we did a great deal of outreach to try to reach as many people as possible, both through our communications, USBI, as well as amazing support from EBI and the Australian and New Zealand Biochar Industry Group, or ANSPIG, as well as other national and subnational biochar groups. The web survey results were anonymized, regionalized, as well as aggregated, and that is the research that you see in this report. And then there were in-depth interviews conducted to augment that and to provide both more background as well as answer some questions we had as a result of the survey. Next slide, please. So who participated in this? We had a little bit over 1,000 respondents, and you can see that among the categories that we created, we had a little bit more than a third from biochar producers. We also noted, and you'll see this in the report, that some of these categories could also be counted in other categories. One notable one was equipment manufacturers, and that they were often also biochar producers. Next slide, please. From where we were very pleased on one hand with the responses and the geographic coverage. It is, of course, notable that we had a slight predominance of responses from North America, which in the way that the geography that, or sorry, the regions that we used, and this is referenced in the report in the methodology section, that does count Central America, as well as, of course, Canada. And so generally speaking, we were pleased with the geographic coverage. Of course, we want to do much better, and that's one of our top goals. And really, everyone on this webinar can help us do that for the next research, which will be coming out later this year. Next slide, please. And from that geography, we did have 101 countries represented. Again, with the transparency that we always want to do better, we were quite pleased with the representation. So now, next slide, please. Let's get into the very top line results. We from, again, the self-reported research, so results, we had over 350,000 metric tons of biochar produced in 2023. We see that while CDR markets are thriving and a really important part of the economics of this industry, a majority of the producers that responded to the survey are not participating in the voluntary carbon market. And that's certainly something that we want to understand better. A clarion call came through this research of the need to develop high quality markets for the physical biochar alongside the carbon credits. Next slide, please. And another thing that came out, particularly across the geographies, is the wide range of biochar production scales and business models, really showing how relevant it is for many, many different conditions, economies, and we want to be able to support all of those scales to produce both very high quality biochar that solves a number of problems, as well as highly durable carbon credits. And finally, this feedback loop that we were cultivating through this research shows us that the biochar industry needs us to help with, again, developing end-use markets for the physical biochar, advocating for biochar in the broader carbon dioxide removal space and associated policy. And then that, of course, will overlap with supporting biochar companies to improve their access to both private and public funding through capital as well as grants in some cases. Next slide, please. So now at this point, I will hand it over to Miles for some more in-depth analysis.
Hi, good morning all, or afternoon, whatever it may be. I'm the program director with United States Biochar Initiative, and I'll be talking through the next 10 or so slides before handing things back over to Wendy Liu. So first off, on industry growth, this slide shows global production. Before I dig into this, I just want to sort of describe in some ways how these data were collected. So essentially, the biochar producers that participated in this survey were asked to report their total production in 2021, 2023, and 2025. They were also asked to provide the percentage of that production that was used for biocoal or other non-carbon preserving end uses. So those values, sort of the biocoal values, were subtracted out. So the data that are presented here do not include biochar that is combusted or biocoal. It's also worth noting that because we regionalized and anonymized the data, we didn't have the ability to go and validate every data entry, right? So we received 331 responses from biochar producers, and clearly it wasn't going to be feasible to go contact each, but we didn't actually have the ability to do that either. So the validation we did was pretty light. We did do some validation to remove some values in the data set that appeared to be clearly erroneous. At the same time, we did some follow-up with some producers that we know of, some of the larger producers. And what we know is that many large producers did not participate in the survey. So we hope to improve that next time around, but we also know that the values reported here are very likely underestimates of global production. So what do these values say? Well, in 2021, there were about 96,000 tons of biochar produced around the world, and in 2023, at least 350,000. One of the takeaways here was, as Wendy Liu said, we know we're overrepresenting North America. That's likely because this survey was a collaboration between IBI with an international focus and USBI with a North American focus. So we think we overrepresented. I don't think these data overestimate production in North America, but we think we're closer to the true production in North America than we are in other regions. But clearly the industry, significant production in North America, Europe, Asia, and South America, lower rates in Africa and Oceania. Next, getting into economic value of the industry. This tells a really similar story, dramatic growth between 2021 and 2023, going from about 156 million to 610 million. Similarly, these are self-reported values from participants. So in this, we included equipment manufacturers, wholesalers and value-added distributors, and biochar producers. These data in a lot of ways are representative of an early stage industry that's scaling quickly. Particularly in 2021, you see more than half of the revenue is going to equipment manufacturers, which kind of represents an industry that's scaling up, putting a lot of money into CapEx, putting in a lot of equipment. Over time, we certainly expect the portion of revenue going to producers and wholesalers to increase, and the component going to manufacturers to decrease. We don't think it'll go obviously to zero, but it'll stabilize at a lower value as the industry matures. But we're really optimistic around these data. So next, we asked all respondents, what are the key factors driving growth of the biochar industry? And respondents were asked to select their top 3. Growing awareness for biochar, clearly the number one growth driver, followed by carbon credit demand and increased agricultural demand for biochar. Other components were important too, things like government incentives and subsidies, improvements in technology, but really growing awareness, carbon credit demand, and increased demand from agriculture really led the way here. Now, at the same time, we asked a similar question to all respondents that what are the primary challenges or obstacles for the industry? Similarly, asking respondents to select their top 3. And low awareness of biochar came up number 1, which is funny because it also came up as a key driver of growth. So it's both a driver and an obstacle. So clearly, awareness of biochar is one of the very key things that all of us need to focus on, and particularly at USBI, IBI, and other biochar organizations, is just increasing awareness. Insufficient market demand for biochar was a clear second place here. That I think is emerging as a pretty significant concern for growing the industry. Carbon credit demand is solid, whereas demand for the physical product is less solid. So really growing that pie in terms of revenue is really important. And then the third component here was limited access to capital. So now voluntary carbon markets, they're a clear bright spot in the industry, no doubt about it. They were listed as the number 2 growth factor, but at the same time, most producers do not generate any carbon removal credits. So you can see that's about 58% of respondents reported generating 0 revenue from the voluntary carbon markets. The majority of producers are somewhere in sort of the 10 to 50% range, but way over on the right, it's a little interesting because there's also a number of producers that are clearly generating essentially 100% of their revenue from carbon removal credits. And Wendy Liu will dig into this a bit later, but it's a bit interesting that there is a component that's able to generate all the revenue, but then the majority are not generating any revenue. Now, there are some potential explanations there. I think one of the reasons is probably related to, well, 2 of the reasons are probably related to producer scale. So for smaller scale producers, it can be hard to access carbon removal credits, mostly just based on the complexities of generating those credits, things like MRV and sort of deal size matter. But there's also that additionality concern. So in all 4 of the existing methodologies for biochar carbon removal credits, there are additionality requirements that essentially, if you were producing biochar before these credits became available, you're probably not eligible to sell these credits. So some of the earliest adopters are excluded from participating. And we're not totally sure what percentage of production that represents, but there are some other opportunities there for those producers. But so next, in terms of perceptions of the voluntary carbon markets, we asked those carbon industry respondents to provide feedback on the credibility of biochar in the voluntary carbon markets. So this was just to carbon industry respondents, and about 60% listed biochar as either very high or high credibility in the voluntary carbon markets. So clearly good news there. Another 24% listed moderate credibility, and then only about 12% listed low or very low. So I'll just say, these results are certainly encouraging. At the same time, we know that the way we marketed this survey, obviously, IBI and USBI are biochar-focused organizations with biochar-focused contact lists, right, and followers on social media and things like that. So we know that we're probably providing over-optimistic results here, and next time around, we hope to sort of increase participation among other parts of the carbon industry. But I would say just generally good news here, but more work to do. So now in terms of end uses, we asked all producers, that was 331 producers, to provide their top 3 end-use markets for physical biochar. And not surprisingly, agriculture for crop production was the top category by a long shot. So at 70%, followed by several other agricultural end uses. So you'll notice these stars. I'm using those in the next few slides just to categorize some of these subtopics into larger categories. So agriculture is in green, environmental uses are in yellow, and then these material uses are in that blue color. So clearly things like crop production, horticulture, and livestock production very much leading the way. Agriculture is certainly the current top market and likely to be the top market for biochar for quite some time. Next were some of these environmental applications, things like soil and water remediation and filtration. And then building materials, things like concrete and asphalt. Those were quite a bit lower. We're happy to see them on the list. I think over time, they're very likely to move up this list. So another way we asked this question, so that prior slide was about what are the end use markets that you're engaged in today. And this question was a little bit of a twist on that, which was, what are the markets that USBI and IBI and other biochar organizations should focus on? So how should we strategize to increase market demand for physical biochar? And I did the same thing where I kind of took these response categories and broke them out into bigger categories for soil and ag, environmental, and materials. And one of the surprising pieces here was that biochar enhanced fertilizers were the leading priority here. So these are materials essentially you can make liquid or granular fertilizers that combine powdered biochar with fertilizer, and they have a lot of value, sort of increasing nitrogen use efficiency, increasing water holding, a lot of the general benefits of biochar, but they're easier to deploy because they can be deployed using sort of existing fertilizer application equipment. So that came out on top, bulk soil amendment and environmental remediation. You know, it's a similar story to the last slide, but this is really what we're using at USBI and IBI to sort of steer the ship forward as we engage in market development activities. So this will be the type of thing that we do on an annual basis to try and learn where we should be focusing our time. Next, a bit of a producer focus here. There's a significant diversity in production types and sizes around the world. So these are 2 questions that were asked to the 331 biochar producer respondents. On the left was a question about sourcing equipment, and on the right was a question about the type of equipment. So on the left, you'll notice that 54% of producers built their own production equipment. That was a really surprising finding to me. I thought that would be more like a quarter, but it was over half. Another 14% were buying components and then integrating them, and about 30% were buying a turnkey system directly from a manufacturer. On the right, we asked about the type of equipment. So the 2 leading categories, or actually the leading category, were stationary systems, either augers or kilns. And then these other stationary systems or batch reactors were under 15%. So about half of production systems are stationary systems, either augers, kilns, or batch reactors. Next, another 24% were portable kilns, 6% were mobile carbonizers, 2% were high carbon fly ash extraction, and that's predominantly in North America. And then 16% were other. So clearly a lot of variety in production systems. And when you look at these 2 together, one of the things that struck me is I assumed going in that those that built their own production equipment would be almost exclusively portable kilns. You know, portable kilns can be built by, using metal fabrication techniques. But what these data show actually is that even if all of the portable kilns, 24%, were built by the kiln manufacturer, right, by the producer, that still leaves a whole lot of other types of systems that are being built by biochar producers. So clearly there is a lot of, I would say, knowledge in equipment building and a lot of DIY attitude out there, which is really great to see, and can be a component of keeping costs down for production systems. Next, looking at these by global region. So I took that same data and we essentially indexed production systems to production volumes. And we used data for 2021 and 2023, which were reported, and also essentially future-looking data for 2025. Now, take the 2025 data with a grain of salt. These are companies that are hoping that they get to these values by 2025. So whether or not we get to that 2.7 million metric tons by 2025 is certainly an open question, but I think the trends likely hold true. And what I took away from this is that the percentage of biochar being produced by stationary systems, that those augers or kilns at the bottom, or stationary batch reactors, the green bar at the top, those are really increasing in prevalence. So the amount of biochar being produced by those types of systems is really increasing. While the production associated with things like portable kilns and high carbon fly ash are going down. You know, whether these trends hold over time, it sort of remains to be seen, but it clearly seems like that is the likely trend. And, you know, in a lot of ways that makes sense. These larger scale production systems can produce significant volumes of biochar. You know, they can hit a lower price point in a lot of cases. So not particularly surprising, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over time. Next, a producer focus on adding value to raw biochar. This was a question where we asked to producers about all the types of things they do to raw biochar to add value to it. And I'll just first off start by saying only about 18% of producers don't add any value to raw biochar. So this really speaks to the fact that producers are understanding that biochar is an ingredient, it's a component. It's not, raw biochar is no longer viewed as the end product by most producers, which I think is a really good thing for the industry to start viewing biochar as an ingredient and a product, rather than bulk char being kind of the end product. So what were they doing with biochar? Well, enriching it with nutrients and grinding and crushing, blending with other amendments and compost. And those were some of the top end uses. Also things like packaging, quality testing, and activation. So a lot here. And with that, I will hand it back over to Wendy Liu to close out the presentation.
Excellent, Miles. And if you're able to stay on camera, I think I'd love to have you comment on a couple of these slides. So moving back to the feedback loop that we were trying to create with through the questions around how biochar associations or organizations can be better supporting the industry, you can see that just under 50% of respondents are engaged in some way with a biochar association, whether that's a subnational, national, regional, or international organization, including IBI. However, we know that this data shows us that we need to do more and better, and that is really what we're going to be using this for, as Miles has said. We can go to the next slide. And using Miles's his star and the color data, we see that again the same feedback is coming through really strongly for developing end-use markets for biochar, as well as being supported by standards and specifications, in this case, material standards for biochar, to create confidence and assurance about the safety and the efficacy of biochar. Excuse me. We also see the need to advocate for biochar in the CDR space more broadly. According to CDR.FYI, less than 15% of the funding that's going into CDR technologies is currently going to biochar, while it is the industry is providing over 90% of the delivered carbon credits in 2023. So we see this disparity, and I think that there is a hopeful message in between those two numbers showing what the biochar industry could do with more and expanded funding. We also see a need to advocate for biochar carbon removal in the policy and lobbying spaces, and then, of course, increasing access to funding, both private and public funding for biochar. Next slide, please. moving on to looking at that biochar carbon removal credits from a geographic perspective, I just really wanted to point to the results that we had from South America and Africa, and showing the ways that this can provide catalytic funding for biochar projects. And Miles, did you want to add anything to this slide?
I'll just kind of describe a bit of what I did to make it, which was essentially just take the respondents' categories for the amount of revenue they generated and then apply that to their production. I was really surprised by the amount of production in North America, Europe, and Asia that was not receiving any carbon credit revenue, and then compared to the data from South America and Africa. So it was really surprising to me, and really shows, I think, that there are opportunities to drive biochar production entirely on carbon removal credit revenue.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to the next slide, please. And also just to mention that as we're wrapping this up, I see we have many questions in the Q&A, but please feel free to start putting them in and we'll answer as many as we can. So this slide is representing an earlier slide that Miles showed, but going across both a geographic as well as a technology, this type of technology. And so, you know, I think that a really big takeaway that we have said is how varied the type of production, the scale of production, the type of technologies that are being used across the world. And I think it is painting a picture of an industry that can have a full spectrum of production, from very large industrial production in static locations all the way to portable technologies that will at this point be smaller scale, but are providing a service both on carbon removal as well as all of the many co-benefits from biochar. Miles, did you want to mention anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Excellent. All right, I think that is our last slide. Except to look forward, of course, to the next market research report. We will be conducting it annually in the fourth quarter of the year. We welcome everyone to participate, please, as well as to hear from all of the subnational, national, and regional biochar associations, because we believe firmly that that is the way to increase responses and to increase the data collection. And we also will be taking a lot of lessons learned from this project to improve not only the questions, but also at the outreach, as I said. And Miles, did you want to add anything for that piece?
No, other than that, well, I guess yes. Just really looking forward to improving this for next time around, both regionally, but also really digging into the questions and probably reaching out to different, sort of respondent types to make sure that the questions we ask really get the information we want, particularly to reduce responses that use the other category in different questions. Anytime we get an other response, it means we're not getting the type of information, as much information as we can. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the only thing that I would add to wrap it up is that this survey is by no means the only time that we want to hear from the industry. And so we welcome not only comments and questions about this particular report outside of the webinar, but also in general about ways that that our organizations can be better serving the industry, because that is literally why we exist. So I think we can go to Q&A now, and it might be, yeah, so here is a QR code that you can use, and I believe the link will also be in the chat. And we could keep that up while we have Q&A if we liked. And then Lucia, we'd love to welcome you back on the virtual stage to answer questions as well. Miles, looking at the Q&A, I thought we might start with, excuse me very much, that we might start with just a simple question about what is the right scale for entering into the voluntary carbon market? Which, of course, is not a simple question at all, but I'd really love to hear, Lucia and Miles, your thoughts about how to assess that, because it's a question that we know comes up a great deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the carbon industry perspective, there's a certain minimum deal size for carbon removal credits that makes sense for different carbon industry companies, right? Selling 200 tons of biochar carbon removal credits in a deal is probably not efficient. What that exact minimum value is, I'm not sure. My guess is that it'll actually go up over time as larger deals in other technologies and in biochar increase in availability. But at the same time, there are efforts underway that I know of to aggregate that production from smaller scale systems to make it so that you achieve that minimum deal size. So an example might be a mobile carbonizer company setting up a carbon credit sort of aggregation scheme with a CDR credit verifier. So I think there's opportunities there to get some of these smaller scale producers involved.
Lucia, did you have anything to add on the?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have a kind of general remark just going through the questions. Yeah, we have to consider that when we speak about biochars, it's more appropriate maybe to talk about biochars in plural, because it's a big family of products with many different characteristics, and this is really impacting on several factors, on the end use of the product, on the price of the product, on many things. So we have started with this survey, which is kind of general one. So we need to articulate a little bit more, for instance, for the prices and so on, because it doesn't say much to know what are the prices unless we do know what quality has that biochar that we are talking about. So that's my reply. And also, as for the VCM, the voluntary carbon market, I replied in the Q&A just to go to VYI.com, I guess. Because they have a very interesting insights on this sector, on this kind of market also of biochar.
Excellent, thank you both. We're moving on to another question that I think is sort of at the heart of how to approach this research, which is around why larger biochar producers may not be as willing to report production numbers. I think one thing I might start with, and then I'd love to hear both of your perspectives, is to acknowledge that this research report is based on self-reported numbers, which of course is has some benefits and it has some potential disadvantages. And so we are thinking about how we could potentially do a combination effort in the future that would have internet survey data, which allows us to collect a lot more data than we can, combined with more validated data. And we think that this could potentially help us get the larger producer numbers through more qualitative research approaches to augment the quantitative research. And also to acknowledge that the EBI reports are more focused on this qualitative interview type of research gathering, which provides, we know, very rich data. Miles and Lucia, did you have anything to add?
I mean, I think some of the producers, I would say there's probably two, maybe three. Even if we try our hardest, we're not going to reach every biochar producer. That's very clear, right? I mean, there's no way, even if we put a lot of effort into marketing the survey on the front end, we're not going to get this in front of everyone. There's also the component of time. Any company that's extremely busy in a growing market probably is a little bit more focused on selling biochar than on completing a survey. And we totally understand that. We think the value here is real for those producers. So we hope that more of them will engage in the future. And we know that a lot of them did. And then I think that the final component is just uncertainty around data handling. And that's why we went with this anonymized and regionalized approach. We felt like that was the best way to get good data from producers. At the same time, we're fully aware that some producers might not even feel comfortable with that. There is competition between biochar producers, and both for selling biochar carbon removal credits, but also for financing for production facilities. So I think those are probably the leading reasons, and we hope we can do a little better next time around.
If I can add a little piece, it's about sampling, how to build a sample of industries that represent the sector. That's something we need to fix. Because to me, it's more meaningful to have a kind of representative sampling of industries that can offer really very good information on that. So all this given, I think it's really a good starting point, and I appreciate the outcomes and the surprises that are coming from this. And there are a lot of questions that are raising from this report, which is good, I think.
Yes, very true. Lots of questions to be answered in future research. Hello to John Hoffmeyer, who for a very long time was part of IBI. He wanted to answer. He had a question around the other opportunities for manufacturers question. And Miles, you had mentioned that sort of what you had done with that particular data. Could you expand upon that?
Yeah, the question is related to production in Africa that would use sort of top-down burn approaches to producing biochar. Going into this, we had expected that those producers would have selected the kiln as their production technology. We might expand upon that in the next run around, but that's what we were hoping that those producers would respond, would be that they were using a kiln technology. So I think we'll have to sort of modify that moving forward.
We also had a question. There have been several questions that I'm going to try to sort of condense into one, which is really around creating market demand for the physical biochar, which, as we repeatedly said, really came through in this research. There are a couple of sort of questions beneath it, and one is around sort of why. What is your perspective about there not being as much demand for biochar as a product, and then also looking at biochar demand creation for blended products with fertilizers as well as in feed use. So Miles, you might be able to speak a little bit from the North American perspective on those two, and then Lucia, it would be great to get your thoughts.
So I think one component of the demand side for biochar, to me, has been that the industry thus far has been a relatively small scale industry of small scale producers. That's changing, and there's a lot more producers that are producing larger volumes and a really consistent product. But from the agriculture side, the benefits are significant, but they have to be significant enough to cover the cost of the product. And biochar has historically been fairly expensive. Prices are coming down for physical biochar. So that's I think, going to open the market. Another thing that I think will open the market up in the agriculture space, at least, will be the participation of large agribusiness companies. Large agribusiness companies drive a lot of the decisions that farmers make, at least in the United States. Crop advisors are often work for agribusiness companies. And those agribusiness companies know about biochar. A lot of them do. Actually, all of them do. But they haven't really participated in making biochar-based products to date because they haven't seen reliable partners across the table in the biochar industry to really build product lines around it, right? If a company like Nutrien wanted to build a product line around biochar enhanced fertilizers, would there be enough consistent quality biochar that they could really put in a lot of time and effort making a product line around biochar? I think the answer to that 5 years ago was certainly no. I think the answer to that question today is likely yes, or getting very close to yes. So I think one of our jobs is to try and get these companies to engage. And one of the pieces there is really building out robust standards and quality standards so that an agribusiness company could source biochar from multiple different medium or small scale producers.
Yeah, I have two comments. The first one is more general, and it is, when we speak about biochar, we speak about the system around the biochar, meaning that a system starts from a feedstock which is available in a given place. So, of course, whatever we think about a business model, the appropriate technology, and this kind of decisions need to be framed in that place, because features are different. Different places, different geographies feature different opportunities. So first of all, the difficulty of biochar stays in capturing the real opportunity that are with the biomass streams, the waste biomass streams that are available in a given setting. And starting from that, we can make the other decision, which kind of technology is more appropriate for that feedstock, for that region, for that climate, for the end use that we think that is possible for the biochar we are going to produce. If we are interested to generate carbon credits, sometimes they are driving the production, sometimes they are not driving the production. So what's the real market for biochar that we intend to develop? Is that agriculture, because we think that our feedstock is more suitable to produce a good agronomic input, or is it for asphalt, concrete, other uses that we think we can target? So that's something that depends on the geography, specifically on the geography. And we know that worldwide, the settings may differ a lot. So what works here in Europe, for instance, I'm from Italy, but I mean, what works here may not work at the same level in another geography. Yeah, that's clear. A second consideration is on standards, which is a very important issue. We know that we need to be sure that the biochar we use, especially for agronomic purposes, is safe. So we need to adopt the highest standards for safety, so that we know that we can put that stuff in the soil with no harm for the food systems. That's a very important aspect. And also, of course, standards are vital also to certify that the biochar has a given carbon content and can generate carbon credits. So this is another level, very important, but we need to work on that. And of course, we need to have standards in place also for other uses of biochar. As IBI, we do have a standard for material and asphalt, and we are working to advance the application of these standards.
Thank you both so much. The only thing that I might add is that I think probably many people on this call are aware of trials or projects that are developing or exploring these type of products. So there are market developments happening in the background, I think, for particularly for blended fertilizer projects. But again, a little bit early days. Miles, I put the next question in the chat, which I hoped you might answer from the percentage of carbon credits. And this is coming from our friend Will Marquis from PIREG. The question about the biochar percentage credits as it relates to the percentage of total revenue, and how that might have affected the data or how we reported it.
So I think the question is about this slide, maybe. And the question, I think, is the percentage of revenue from carbon credits. So essentially, the way we developed this is we asked every producer respondent to report the percentage of their total revenue associated with biochar carbon removal credit sales. And they responded in different buckets, 10% buckets ranging from 0 all the way to 91 to 100%. We then indexed those to the self-reported production values for all of those and then separated them out by geography. So what this really means is that in North America, slightly more than 60% of biochar producers, or producers representing slightly more than 60% of total US production, did not generate any carbon credits as part of their revenue streams. And a small fraction of producers in North America, a small amount of production, was associated with 91 to 100% of their revenue from carbon removal credits. Conversely, in South America and Africa, there are more than half of producers are generating essentially all of their, or more than half of production is associated with producers that generate nearly or all of their revenue from carbon removal credits. I take this as two things. One, North America, Europe, and Asia had a significant amount of biochar production, were some of the leaders in developing biochar production. So I think that could be a part of it, is that some of the more large legacy producers may be excluded from participating in the voluntary carbon markets because of additionality requirements. Another side, in terms of South America and Africa, my guess here is that the fact that carbon dioxide removal credits are a global commodity, they have a global price. They don't even need to be shipped, right? There's no shipping requirement for carbon dioxide removal credits. You produce it at the site of production, and that's the credit. Lower labor costs in parts of the global south, I think, provide a business model that relies on just carbon removal credits. I think that would be hard to pull off in Europe and North America. But in different parts of the world, relying entirely on carbon removal credits is a pathway that I think can work.
Excellent. Thank you, Miles. We've had a couple questions also around either decisions we made or about the data, as well as sort of the methodology. One that I wanted to address is a sort of central question of self-reporting and basing research on an internet survey. So the question was around sort of how we made a decision to share this data, and I'll start from the IVI perspective just very briefly, and of course love to hear Lucia's thoughts, and then of course Miles. I mean, very generally speaking, there was a very grave need for reliable industry-produced market data at the global level, and have not been filled by the industry since 2015. There, of course, are many research reports that you could part with $5,000 to $10,000 to purchase from, third-party research firms, and there probably is some use in those, but we believe that the industry produced market data will be the best, and that is really the core of starting this effort again on an annual basis, and really drove our decision to do that. We also, and because of the self-reporting aspect and the reporting that we got from the 1001 or 1007 respondents for 2025 data, we also wanted to present that sort of alongside the optimism numbers that we got, and to sort of contextualize that this is a very optimistic industry, and we have those numbers, and there'll be a good benchmark when we produce this next survey results to see what happened in 2024. Yes, Miles, what else might you add?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, that I just want to correct one misconception, that I think there might be a misconception that that most of the bigger producers didn't participate. That's not accurate. We think most of the big producers did participate, but we know of some that didn't, put it that way. And we want to increase participation for sure. That was essentially a way of acknowledging that we think that these numbers are underestimates in total. But in terms of releasing the data, I would say there's no way to create a perfect snapshot of a global industry. It's not possible. Any report that you see in any industry is always going to be an estimate at best. This is no different than those. It's an estimate. We hope the estimates get better over time. And I think one of our goals with this is to sort of put this report out, show the value of reports like this, and ideally collaborate more in the future to get a greater level of participation and improve this each year going forward. But I think the data is really valuable, and not releasing it, I don't think would have been the right decision.
Yeah, my 2 cents. I think it's very important to start from something, and a lot of questions are coming. I see also in the chat there are many, and of course this is very good because this is stimulating to investigate further, especially to explore some aspects of the biochar space as a whole. So to me, it's very important to have a kind of initial picture and to, keep on monitoring how this picture will evolve over time. Meaning that we could develop the methodology in order to be more representative and more robust, as well as to involve more producers. And I expect that in the future there will be more numbers because what we see from the IBI window, we see many things that are moving. It's a very dynamic situation right now, so which is really nice to see. And so I expect that in the next report, we will reflect this situation.
Excellent, thank you. Keeping an eye on time, I thought we could end on a really hopeful question with just a quick rapid fire answer. I also want to thank everyone for all of your activity in the chat. I hope that you're using that to make connections. We had a question just really quickly about if it's possible to get an attendee list. What we will do is send out we'll send out a request to everyone who registered for this webinar to opt in to such a list, and then we would share that with those who opted in, which is the only way we could do that. But we really want these to serve as a point of connection across the globe. So the question really quickly is, what practical on-the-ground tactics have you seen that are providing success for scaling biochar as well as converting to sales and for biochar itself? So I'll answer very quickly, which is partnerships. We're seeing really strong partnerships with companies around the world, with non-biochar companies, whether it's agricultural commodity entities or potentially the companies from which they're getting the biomass. But the partnerships we think that are being forged with associated sectors with the biochar industry are producing actually sales and scaling results. Lucia. Oh, sorry, Mom.
You're on mute. Lucia, you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to say that as IBI, our role is to support industrial development. Of course, we don't have a direct role in developing biochar operations, but we are happy to see when they happen around. So we put all our efforts so that they could be in the best position to advance with their business. That's our job, because we want a lot of biochar produced by 2050. So that's our vision. So yes, our efforts will be in the education mainly, and communication and training and developing resources for the biochar industry and practitioners able to work in different geographies. Of course, we know it's kind of challenging because different geographies means different settings, different backgrounds, different approaches, different business models, different landscapes, institutional and governance systems. For instance, what we are tracing now is that there are also some governments are trying to put high taxes on the carbon removals that are generated from biochar operations. And sometimes these taxes may compromise the revenue streams that can be generated. So this is a huge issue that needs to be addressed properly. So this is something we are considering, as well as some sectors which are key, for instance, at global level and can have a huge impact for the biochar productions. That's our job. Of course, there are also other players in this space, and this space is really rapidly growing, and the biochar community is expanding very quickly. Yeah, we are there just to serve this community.
I would say one of the things that USBI is really focused on is, I would say, real world, on the ground trials in the agricultural system, both as a soil amendment, but also in things like biochar enhanced fertilizers. We have a number of different active projects in the area, and in the US, we're, I would say, lucky to have federal support through USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, through a program that can help pay farmers to use biochar. And we're really focused on scaling up that program and also sharing successes from farmers who have used that program.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of the questions, and we will be sharing, as we said, the recording of this webinar. Thank you so much to Lucia Brusigan and Miles and Lauren for this webinar, and to everyone for attending. Stay in touch, please.
Thank you.